Haplogroup J is Japheth. But before we get too deep into the video, first I want to tell you guys about my social media platforms. So I have a Clubhouse account and we can actually talk to one another on it. I also host Clubhouse rooms every now and then where I might talk about history and genetics of the Middle East and Africa. I have a Twitter page, a Facebook account, and a Facebook page, as well as a Instagram, all titled The Hebrew of Israel. And what I typically do on these platforms is post upcoming videos as well as slides for my presentations. And so just be on the lookout for all of that on my social media platforms. And if you want to support me financially for the channel, you can look at my Patreon as well as my PayPal and my GoFundMe. And with all of that out of the way, let's begin with the video. We're going to quickly summarize Japheth's descendants and who they are. Let's put everything together that we learned so far. Number one, Japheth's name means to extend. This could refer to migration. Two, the biggest migration in ancient human history was the Proto-Indo-European migration. Three, the Proto-Indo-European migration was likely beginning in the Armenia Plateau region. Four, Japheth, according to the Book of Jubilees, settled in the cold and the north. The north of the Middle East is predominantly Indo-European speakers. And six, Japheth is associated with white or light-skinned peoples. And seven, white and light-skinned peoples is predominantly in Europe and Eurasia. And eight, ancient Indo-European cultures have a tradition of Japheth's descendant, of descending from a man named Japheth. And nine, Jews, Muslims, and Christian scholars all seem to agree that Japheth is the father of Europeans and Eurasians. So Genesis chapter 9, verse 27, basically no matter what version of the scriptures you read, it basically says, may God extend Japheth's territory, may God expand the territory of Japheth, may God enlarge Japheth, may God expand the territory of Japheth, and may God shall enlarge Japheth, may God enlarge Japheth. Basically talking about Japheth's descendants expanding, enlarging, extending, things of that nature, which could obviously refer to migration. Japheth's descendants would have left from the Middle East, going into Europe, Central Asia, and South Asia. And this kind of fits with the migration of Proto-Indo-Europeans from the Armenian Plateau. Dr. David Reach, professor in the Department of Genetics at the Harvard Medical School, breaks this down beautifully. Although I'm not saying that he believes in the scriptures, but what he says does match scriptures perfectly. Ancient DNA available from this time in Anatolia shows no evidence of steep ancestry similar to that in the Yamnaya. This suggests to me that the most likely location of the population that first spoke an Indo-European language was south of the Caucasus Mountains, perhaps in modern-day Iran or Armenia. Because ancient DNA from people who lived there matches what we would expect for a source population, both for the Yamnaya and for ancient Anatolians. So basically, people carrying this Caucasian-like ancestry is seen in both the ancient Anatolians, or Proto-Indo-Europeans, as well as in the Yamnaya culture, but we don't see, let's say, Eastern European hunter-gatherer DNA in the Anatolians. But what unites the Anatolian Indo-Europeans and the Yamnaya Indo-Europeans is this Caucasian DNA, this single ancestral source. So they likely expanded from the southern Caucasus, as he just explained. Here's just a map showing you that. And here's the Armenian Plateau, basically this Proto-Indo-European population going into Anatolia and the Yamnaya and then the rest of Europe. And of course, when it comes to Japheth, his descendants would have settled in the cold and northern parts, as I just said, from the Book of Jubilees, chapter 8, verse 29 and 30. This is the land which came forth for Japheth and his sons as the portion of his inheritance, which he should possess for himself and his sons, for their generations forever. 5 great islands, and a great land in the north, but it is cold. And of course, north of the Middle East is Anatolia, the Caucasus, and Iran, which fits perfectly biblically. Even if you were to use like the idea of the known world, north of that will be Anatolia, the Caucasus, and Iran. But if you were to use the greater world, what we know of, it will be Europe and Central Asia, and even the Americas. It's pretty much cold everywhere that's away from the equator, basically. And to this day, and even in ancient times, most of the people north of Syria and Iraq are Indo-European speakers. A lot of people probably don't know this, but yes, Semitic isn't the only language spoken in the Middle East. There are, in fact, Indo-European speakers in the Middle East, both anciently and even presently today. Everything in orange is Indo-European speaking peoples, and everything in green is well, it's not a Semitic language; it's a Central Asian language, and everything in blue is a Caucasian language. And so now dealing with Japheth's skin tone, as most writers say, he was the father of a lot of white skinned peoples. This is from Perkei D Rabbi Eleazar, who says he blessed Japheth and his sons. They are entirely white, and he gave them for an inheritance the desert and its fields. These are the inheritance with which he endowed them. And this is from the history of the messengers and the kings. The children of Japheth settled in Aswan toward the north. They are light skinned and very fair skinned. And here's just a map showing you where most fair skinned people are or light skinned people are. It's, like I said, north of the world. And just to familiarize yourselves with Japheth's descendants, again, they're Indo Europeans, according to most uh, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim writers. I'm just going to read what's in yellow. Japheth, may God enlarge, who was one of the sons of Noah. Apparently, Japheth was fruitful, for he had at least 7 children who became the ancestors of the people who lived to the north and west of Palestine in the modern territory of the Anatolian and the Aegean. Thus, Japheth primarily became the ancestor of the modern day Indo European family of nations. And just giving you some more information on that. Historically, Japheth was the progenitor of the Aryan or Indo-European Indo-Germanic branch of the human family. They appear to have spread from the Caucasus, which is what we literally just talked about, that's interesting, eastward into Central Asia, and westward through Asia Minor to the islands and coastlands of Europe, and perhaps all the way to Spain. And just showing you the map of Indo-European peoples going as far east as Central Asia and South Asia to as far west as Spain and the British Isles. So, now that we have a basic idea of Japheth's descendants, now let's look into why Haplogroup J would likely fit Japheth. It is believed that Japheth and his descendants were light or white skinned. From a genetic point of view, light skin comes from Caucasus hunter gatherers, and Caucasus hunter gatherers carried haplogroup J. So this is from Persian historian Tabari, and it says Japheth, whose descendants are very fair skinned and olive skinned, and this is from Ibn Abbas. He made the descendants of Japheth white skinned. And so here is the Upper Paleolithic genomes reveals deep roots of modern Eurasians, and it says to explore further, we looked at genomes in 2 pigmentation genes proposed to have been strongly selected in the ancestors of all of modern Europeans, namely SLC45A2 and SLC24A5. Select SNPs in the SLC45A2 and SLC24A5 genes contribute to lightening of skin and are almost fixed in modern Europeans. We found that Katos and Serbia have the ancestral version of the SLC45A2 variant, but both Caucasus hunter-gatherers have the select version of the SLC24A5 gene, encompassed by the most commonly associated haplotype C11 found in modern populations. And so Caucasus hunter-gatherers have one of the most ancestral versions of light skin, ancestral alleles for light skin, SLC 24A5, light and intermediate. And then they would have passed this on to the Yamnaya, who of course are Proto-Indo-Europeans, and then they would have just spread it throughout Europe and everywhere else they went. It's believed Japheth descendants settled in the cold north, and Caucasus hunter-gatherers and Haplogroup J were far to the north of the Near East. They also would have been in the Caucasus Mountains. And just reiterating, Book of Jubilees, chapter 8, 44 through 45. This is the land which came forth for Japheth, a great land in the north, but it is cold. And over here, it's typically cold north of Syria and Iraq, kind of like the skin tone map, actually. Anatolia and southern Caucasus and Iran, it's like I said, it's just typically kind of cold in that part of the world. And this is where Haplogroup J sort of thrived. J, seen mostly in Anatolia and Europe in the Upper Paleolithic time frame, and Anatolia, Caucasus, and the Zagros, Iran, where it is typically cold, as we just saw. And this is typically Japheth's territory to most Jewish, Christian, and Muslim writers. Everything sort of fits with the cold in the north, Haplogroup J, and the territory of Japheth. And of course, the Serbia man, or the Caucasus hunter-gatherer samples we found was in western Georgia in the north, in the far north, belonging to the J1. So, Upper Paleolithic genomes reveal deep roots of modern Eurasians. Both Georgian hunter-gatherer samples are assigned to haplogroup J, with Katos belonging to the subhaplogroup J2A. In a study exploring J haplogroups in 445 individuals from Eurasia, J2A was found at highest frequency in Georgia and Iraq. It is intriguing that both the mitochondrial and Y chromosome haplogroups for our ancient Georgian samples have been associated with the Neolithicization of Europe. Very interesting. This tentatively suggests a genetic link between Georgian hunter-gatherers and early European migrants from the Near East, kind of like Japheth descendants who would have expanded from the Middle East to Europe. Anyways, origins and diffusion of human Y chromosome haplogroup J1-M267. Our Bayesian continuous phylogenetic analysis suggests a origin of haplogroup J1-M267 in West Asia, confirming previous assumptions. Most of the deeply diverged lineages belong to the population from the northern latitudes of the region. Interesting, to the north. In line with the finding of the late Pleistocene hunter-gatherer from the South Caucasus, our analysis provides better statistical confidence for the origin of haplogroup J1-M267 in the area encompassing the Caucasus, the Armenian highland, and the Zagros Mountains. It's believed Japheth name means to extend. This expansion of Japheth likely refers to the Indo-European migration. This migration likely took place in Armenia. If this is the case, then haplogroup J was high in that part of the world, like we just read. Japheth descendants expanding from the Middle East to Europe, and Indo-Europeans expanding from the Middle East into Europe, from Armenia specifically. And this fits with what David Reach has said in his 2018 publication, Who We Are and How We Got Here. The most likely location of the population that first spoke an Indo-European language was south of the Caucasus, south of the Caucasus Mountains, perhaps in present-day Iran or Armenia, because ancient DNA from people who live there matches what we would expect for a source population both for the Yamnaya and the ancient Anatolians. And again, reading from Origins and Diffusion of Human Y Chromosome Haplogroup J1-M267, around the time of the Neolithic demographic transition, the genome-wide ancestry of West Asian populations was geographically structured into three groups. Among them, haplogroup J-M304 is found in the Caucasus/Iranian and Anatolian hunter-gatherers and farmers. And this is from Chenun Cho Wang. Excuse me for that mispronunciation. In his 2018 study, The Genetic Prehistory of the Greater Caucasus, and it says the insight that the Caucasus Mountains served not only as a corridor for the spread of Caucasus hunter-gatherer/Neolithic Iranian ancestry, but also for later gene flow from the Caucasus has a bearing on the postulated homelands of Proto-Indo-European languages and documented gene flow that could have carried a consecutive spread of both across West Eurasia, perceiving the Caucasus as an occasional bridge rather than a strict border during the Neolithic and Bronze Age, opens up the possibility of a homeland of Proto-Indo-Europeans south of the Caucasus, which itself provides a parsimonious explanation for an early branching of Anatolian languages. And origin and diffusion of human Y chromosome haplogroup J1-M267. The J1B-F4306 and J1A2-PH77 branches split off at the very beginning. These are rare lineages distributed mostly among ancient and modern populations from the Caucasus, the Armenian highland, Iran, and Pakistan. Interestingly, the 13,000-year-old hunter-gatherer from the South Caucasus belongs to J1B-F4306. Again, haplogroup J is extremely abundant around the homeland of Proto-Indo-Europeans, and literally the Caucasus hunter-gatherers were J markers. So the Armenian Plateau hypothesis gains in plausibility since the Yamnaya apparently partly descended from a Near Eastern population which resembles present-day Armenians. Yet Hayek and his team also state that the question of what language were spoken by the Eastern European hunter-gatherers in the southern Armenian-like ancestral population remains open. That was from Wolfgang Heck in his 2015 study, Massive Migration from the Steppe is a source for Indo-European languages in Europe. And again, origin and diffusion of human Y chromosome haplogroup J1-M267. The J1A1B-Z18375 branch has a geographic distribution subsequently overlapping with that of the J1B-F4306 and J1A2-PH77 branches. The J1A1B-Z18375 branch is found overwhelmingly among ancient and modern populations from the Caucasus, the Armenian highland, Iran, and Anatolia. This branch constitutes the aforementioned peak of haplogroup J1-M267 frequency in the northeast Caucasus. Haplogroup J1-M267 were found among populations living in the Caucasus and neighboring regions. So, perhaps one of the most important and interesting aspects about Proto-Indo-Europeans of the Yamnaya culture is that they derive half of their ancestry from Caucasus hunter-gatherers, and of course, Caucasus hunter-gatherers carried haplogroup J. The Proto-Indo-Europeans, i.e. the Yamnaya people, and the related cultures seem to have been a mix from Eastern hunter-gatherers and a people related to the Near East, either Caucasus hunter-gatherers or Iranian Chalcolithic people with a Caucasian hunter-gatherer component. Each of those two populations contributed about half the Unia DNA. According to Jones at 2015, Caucasus hunter-gatherers' genomes significantly contributed to the Unia steppe herders who migrated into Europe 3000 BCE, supporting a formative Caucasus influence on this important early Bronze Age culture. Caucasus hunter-gatherer left their imprint on modern populations from the Caucasus and also Central and South Asia, possibly marking the arrival of Indo-Aryan languages. Our analysis shows that the ancient population of the Chalcolithic Iran, Chalcolithic Armenia, Bronze Age Armenia, and Chalcolithic Anatolia were all composed of the same ancestral components. That was from Lizard's 2016 study, Genomic Insight into the Origin of Farming in the Ancient Near East. And so this is, like I said, probably the best example to prove that J is likely from Japheth because half of the Caucasus hunter-gatherer DNA is in the Unia Proto-Indo-Europeans. Caucasus hunter-gatherers literally made Proto-Indo-Europeans. Caucasus hunter-gatherers and Eastern hunter-gatherers. So that's just what some people might call a bombshell. So we also see that Haplogroup J was definitely part of the expansion of Indo-Europeans as well. This is from How Eurasia Was Born. While early Indo-Europeans who originally crossed from Anatolia in the Bronze Age were most likely represented by various J2 subclades, genetic data suggests that as soon as they reached Central Europe, they assimilated large masses of the native population, and from then on, the rest of their expansion were characterized by more recently formed subclades of the haplogroup characteristic to the native populations. Haplogroups J2A and J2B all have subclades that spread out both to Europe and through the Iranian plateau to India. What further complicates the situation is that their earliest subclades that had spread to Europe the first time are older than their earliest subclades that had spread to India through the Iranian plateau. Both of these haplogroups at the same time have subclades widespread in Syria and Palestine, in Syria and Mesopotamia. But most of these subclades that are younger than their subclades that had first spread to Europe. These suggest a starting location of these subclades somewhere around Anatolia, since had their starting location been in Syria or Mesopotamia. Then the latter regions should be abundant in ancient subclades of these haplogroups predating their first spread to Europe. Ancient subclades of J1 are found somewhat east of this, either in the Armenian highlands or the Levant. This makes North Mesopotamia, the Jezreel region, a plausible starting point for J1. As subclades of J1 also migrated to Iran and India, and the estimated age of the most recent common ancestors of these subclades often coincide with subclades of J2 that apparently participated in eastward migrations, indicating that such coinciding timings signal migrations where both J1 and J2 participated, as many of these J2 subclades also had some of their own subclades apparently migrating to Europe at the same time. This is a further sign that their location of origins had to be west of the point of origin of J1. While having these subclades of J2 starting from Anatolia would have met those J1 and J2 subclades with coinciding ages simply carried eastward to Iran and Mesopotamia as part of the very same migrations, a much more plausible scenario further supporting both J2A and J2B having started to spread out from Anatolia and J1 east of them in Syria and the Armenian highlands. Among J2A and J2B, J2A seems to have been located westward of J2B as it participated in more ancient westward expansions to Europe than J2B. This gives us the east to west order of J2A in southwest Anatolia, J2B in southeast Anatolia, and J1 in Syria and the Armenian highlands. And so here's just a map showing you the spread of Proto-Indo-Europeans right here, starting from Anatolia, going into Europe, the Pontic Steppe, and India. And then, of course, here's just a map of the distribution of Indo-Europeans, and here's a map of the distribution of Haplogroup J, specifically J2. But we see that Haplogroup J does perfectly overlap with that of the Indo-Europeans. And I don't think that's a coincidence. We also know, according to Greek tradition, that Japheth is part of their ancestry. Therefore, we also know that Caucasus hunter-gatherer ancestry was among ancestral Greeks as well as haplogroup J. Japheth in Hebrew, Japhet or Yephet, may be a transliteration of the Greek Epithos or Epithos, the ancestor of the Hellenistic peoples. His sons and grandsons associate him with the geographic area of the Eastern Mediterranean and Asia Minor, Ionia slash Javan, the Rhodes slash Rhododium, Cyprus slash Kittim, and other points in the region of Greece and Asia Minor. The point of the blessing of Japheth seems to be that Japheth, a Greek descendant people. And this is from the creation of humankind in Athens and Jerusalem. And it says Javan, the fourth son of Japheth, has a close connection to the more northerly part of the Eastern Mediterranean. Mentioned in verse 4 are the islands of Rhodes, of the Rhodium, the Larnaca on Cyprus, Kittim, and a bit more conjunctively Crete, Tarshish. In fact, the linkage with what we know as Greece is explicitly forged by the very name Javan. Visibly, it is a version of Ionia. The point towards which I am working concerns not Javan, but Japheth, Hellenistic in origin too. Japheth is a transliteration of Epithos, sounded in Hebrew Japheth as Japheth is Japhet. Like Yavan, the letter is phonetically closer to Greek. This is genetic origins of the Minoans and Mycenaeans. The origins of the Bronze Age Minoan and Mycenaean cultures have puzzled archaeologists for more than a century. We assembled genome-wide data from 19 ancient individuals, including Minoans from Crete, Mycenaeans from mainland Greece, and their eastern neighbors from southwest Anatolia. We showed that Minoans and Mycenaeans were genetically similar, having at least 3/4 of their ancestry from the first Neolithic farmers of western Anatolia and the Aegean, and most of the remainder from their ancient populations like those of the Caucasus and Iran. However, the Mycenaeans differed from Minoans in deriving additional ancestry from an ultimate source related to the hunter-gatherers of Eastern Europe and Siberia. Introduced via a proximal source related to either the inhabitants of either the Eurasian steppe or Armenia. We carried out principal component analysis methods projecting ancient samples onto the first two principal components inferred from present-day West Eurasian populations that formed two south-north parallel lines in Europe and the Near East along PC2. Minoans and Mycenaeans are centrally positioned in the PCA, framed to the left by ancient populations from mainland Europe and the Eurasian steppe, to the right by ancient populations from the Caucasus and Western Asia. and to the bottom by early Middle Neolithic farmers from Europe and Anatolia. The Bronze Age samples from southwestern Anatolia are also distinct intermediate between Anatolian and Levantine populations toward the bottom and populations from Armenia, Iran, and the Caucasus towards the top. This analysis shows that all Bronze Age populations from the Aegean and Anatolia derived almost 62 through 86% of their ancestry from Anatolian Neolithic related population. However, they also had a component of 9 through 32% of Eastern Caucasus/Iranian related ancestry. It was previously shown that this type of ancestry was introduced into mainland Europe via Bronze Age pastoralists from the Eurasian steppe, who were a mixture of both Eastern European hunter-gatherers and populations from the Caucasus and Iran, which you just read about earlier. The Eastern influence in the Bronze Age populations from Greece and southwestern Anatolia is also supported by an analysis of their Y chromosomes. 4 out of 5 males belonging to Minoans, Mycenaeans, and southwestern Anatolians belong to Haplogroup J. Very interesting. Which was rare or non-existent in earlier populations from Greece and western Anatolia, which were dominated by Y chromosome haplogroup G. Haplogroup J was present in Caucasus hunter-gatherers and a Mesolithic individual from Iran, and its spread westward may have accompanied the Eastern genome-wide influence. Now let's go a little bit deeper. This is from Haplogroup J2 from IndoEuropeans. The Minoan civilization emerged from 2700 BCE and could have been founded by colonists from the Araxes culture who would have brought bronze working with them. Modern Cretans have the highest percentage of J2A, 11%, J1 at 8.5%, J2A at 32%. In Greece, and the highest percentage of J21 and J2A in all of Europe for that matter. The three haplogroups associated with the Araxes culture. In fact, it seems that many branches of J2A may have expanded from the South Caucasus from the Chalcolithic onwards. The presence of these haplogroups and mixtures in southern Italy almost certainly represents Araxes ancestry inherited from Minoan Greeks from the Aegean Islands. And still from IndoEuropeans, outside the Caucasus, the highest frequencies of J2 are observed in Cyprus at 37% and Crete at 34%. And here's just a map showing you of the distribution of J2, and you do see it pretty much high in the Caucasus to Anatolia to the Balkans or Southern Europe with the Greeks and Italians. So it's fairly interesting. So why do I believe haplogroup J is Japheth? Let's put everything together. 1, Japheth is known to have been light-skinned. 2, Caucasus hunter-gatherers originated light-skinned and had haplogroup J. 3, Japheth settled the north/the cold. And 4, Caucasus hunter-gatherers resided in the Caucasus Mountains to the north of the Near East. 5, Japheth's name means to extend. And 6, half of the Caucasus hunter-gatherer ancestry is in all Proto-Indo-Europeans. And 7, Proto-Indo-Europeans expanded and migrated throughout Eurasia. 8, haplogroup J was among the Proto-Indo-European migration. And 9, Greeks have tradition of descending from Japheth. And 10, Caucasus hunter-gatherer / haplogroup J ancestry is among ancestral Greeks. So all of this is the reason why I would believe J has a very strong association with Japheth. And when we look at J and Indo-European speakers, we do see a very interesting overlap. How Indo-European and J seems to perfectly fit one another, almost like a puzzle piece. So these are the reasons why I believe J would belong to Japheth. As far as I'm concerned, J is most definitely one of the many lineages of Japheth. And with that being said, though, Which son of Japheth would best fit haplogroup J? But this is where we end. Haplogroup J is Japheth. With that being said, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, subscribe, click the bell, and share the video. Leave a comment for any questions you might have, and follow any of my social media accounts that I mentioned at the beginning of the video if you want to ask any questions or contact me. And with all that out of the way, have a great day and shalom.